Welcome to Martini Time. It's that happy time of the day when we can reflect on what we've learned today, what adventures we've had, what understanding we've arrived at, and we can have a martini. So, a friend of mine was here and he said, "Could you do the talk without the martini?" I said, "Oh, no. I guess I could. I have done a few with gin and tonic." So anyway, this morning, I hope you tuned into this morning's talk because I've really been, this is really a continuing unfolding of my daily inquiry into these both personal and universal questions, because we're all dealing with our own personal conflicts and double binds, and our nation is caught in double binds where no matter what you do, particularly with this mass shooting, no matter what you do, you still get a mass shooting. You can see. So it's a double bind is when no matter what effort you make, you can't get out. Everything is lose-lose. Each action cancels out the other, you know. And the symbol of that is the Ouroboros, or the snake eating its own tail, going around and around and around. And I've also been investigating and looking at culture from a different view, having been reading some of the books by Joseph Chilton Pearce, which I highly recommend. And today, his book really touched me. I can't go over and get it because I've got this mic on, and if I held the book up, it would be backwards. But he is a philosopher and a scientist who had some great mystical experiences. And I think the philosophers and the scientists and the psychologists and all of these these writers, unless they have some kind of mystical experience, they're all intellect. Because mystical experience comes from the heart. And so when you can get a writer or a teacher who brings both together, you have a both subjective and an objective approach. Like Ken Wilber, not Ken Wilber. Well, okay, yeah, all right. As a philosopher, Wilber is a philosopher with a mystical experience, a poet-philosopher. And I was going to say Ken Burns, when he did the documentary study of Vietnam, presented a subjective and an objective view. Most documentaries are objective. They just tell the facts and the story, you see. But Burns created a subjective, that was personal experience, on both sides, that balanced out the objective documentary of both sides. So it was a masterful coming together of the subjective and the objective view. And so I've been talking about this morning about culture, and I ended up talking about the conflict between the heart and the mind. Now the mind, our intellect, our mind, and our ego, the little self that lives in there, is enculturated in the sense that that is a conditioned self. That self, that I say me, is conditioned by the culture I've been born into. So I'm conditioned by the American culture. And I can go to other cultures, France, Europe, Russia. People like to travel because it gives them this is what broadens you. You know, you get broadened by travel because you get to see your own culture and you get to see your own conditioning when you go abroad, you see. And the further abroad you go, the more you see your own culture. By further abroad, I mean into cultures that are really different from ours. So if you just go to England and France, you're still within the Western civilization culture. But suppose you go live with some Aborigines in the Amazon. you see. Now you've got something, you see. So the sense of our culture, and when I say we're enculturated, it means that our parents are transmitters of our culture. And whether they try to or not, they're going to transmit the American culture to us, and we're going to grow up and transmit it to our children. And I've been calling this the cultural egg. So, so we live inside of a cultural egg. And the cultural egg now is, for the last, since TV, since the 50s, the cultural egg has been electronic. And it went from, TV into the internet to cell phones, little hand computer, you see. And we are now pretty much living in an electronic culture that is far more exciting than our everyday small town. Kids are all, look at kids today, they're all in there. So we have to understand, how enculturated we are. And these mass shootings are basically a sign that something's wrong with the culture. And I wrote it earlier today, that it's almost like we believe, and I remember reading something, and I remember coming across a number of people who are stating this fact, that we believe we're living in a movie. Now everything is a movie. It's like we're watching the world as a movie, And so I wrote this morning that war has become video games. Look at Vietnam, and you get up, you're basically, particularly if you're in a helicopter, and you're just shooting people. Like, video, we're taught to, now you shoot people through drones. It's like a big video game. And the mass shooter at Las Vegas was like he was in a video game. And I'm sure he felt like he was an action hero, and he was shooting these targets. So it's kind of like we've lost the culture is lifting up, in this electronic, virtual, alternate culture. Trump talks about alternate, we talk about the alt-right and the alternate reality. Well, we're all in an alternate reality. Those of us who leave the culture and like go camping or go live in Alaska or drop out and live in a cabin in the woods, Joseph Chilton Pierce, I went to see him back in the 80s. He lived up in Nelson County, and he had no TV. He had a little cabin up there that he built for his family, and it was in a little valley. And I don't know I guess he had electricity, but he was totally cut off, there. And he wrote books, and he went on lecture tours and everything. But we know a lot of people like that, and there's always this yearning, to the call of the wild, to go out and be in the woods. I'm sure people, I don't hunt, but I'm sure people who hunt find that takes them out of culture. And hunting takes you back to a place prior to civilization. Mark Twain. I loved I used to teach this book, Huck Finn. It was about a child who didn't want to be civilized. And so he went into culture and he tasted it and see what it was like and found it didn't make much sense. So he would always go back to the river where he was satisfied, you see. So the person who drops out of culture still lives in the world, but they don't buy it. They don't eat it. So they're kind of like in a free zone. Other people think they may be a little strange, but other people don't know the subjective side. You see, all we know is the objective. So you really can't tell from looking at a person if they are uncultured. Now that's another good word. They're uncultured. It's kind of like, crude, uncultured, uncivilized, So we have to be civilized. We have to be cultured. And a lot of the political myths today are about, on the right, they honor the uncultured, the Trump, the uneducated, the country guy, the redneck, and all of that. That's in opposition to the cultured elite of the cities and the effetes, and the sniffing snuff, and all that effeminate, unmasculine, So real men are not cultured. They're kind of like uncivilized. They don't shave, and wear their shirt out, you see. I'm not cultured. I'm not civil. My shirt's out, and I don't shave. And I kind of like the Mac Man. Remember those commercials? The Mac Man was natural, and the PC Man was in his suit, and he was all intellectual. And the Mac Man was by a heart man, and the PC Man was intellect man. And Steve Jobs sold a lot of computers with that, creating that myth, you see, or feeding into it. But we can see it everywhere in our culture, this conflict between the heart and the heart which has intelligence. The uncultured man has intelligence, you see. I mean, he knows how to handle himself in any situation. And I laugh at these redneck jokes, because you see these redneck jokes on the internet, where they're making something do out of a bathtub and all this. They're making products, they're making tools and making a way to do things out of junk in their backyard. And we think that's funny, because they can't afford the real stuff like us, you see. They can't afford to go buy the real chainsaw or something. They make up one. But then we go watch MacGyver. And MacGyver, when he's in a fix, makes up tools out of junk lying around, you see. Well, that's great, But then and I think, so the redneck who makes stuff out of junk, when civilization goes down, that's the guy who's going to make it. So anyway, this whole idea of country music, country people, is that they're closer to the earth, closer to their original face, closer to basic intelligence versus the sophisticated intellect of the cities and the academics and the philosophers and science, you see. But this is all inside culture. It's all culture. It's not nobody. The country guy isn't outside of culture. He's just got his own culture. And we can see in our culture, the big egg, you see, we see the big egg dividing into two little eggs. The cultured, and then, of course, the liberals and the Democrats are associated with Eastern city culture, intellectual science even now, and the right is associated with God and true man and all this. You can see this mythology, see, but it's still all in culture. So nobody's going anywhere when you just get into a subculture, kind of like Russian nesting dolls, where you have the big doll and then all these little dolls inside of it. Well, that's the big doll we can't see. All we can see is the little dolls. So what we do, you see, is that in our effort to be liberated from culture, we just get in a group that has a mythology of being out of culture, and now we're against the cultured group. So it's always dividing into us against them. And that's culture. You see. Because when a culture is held together, and I was talking about this morning, what holds a culture together, whether it's the big culture or the subcultures. What holds it together? Well, shame and guilt holds it together. If you try to get out of or go against your culture, your gang, your family, your religion, your party, you're going to get shamed and guilted. So there's a gravitational pull of culture. It's like a cultural egg has a gravity to it that pulls people in. So if you start to go out, you see, and crack out, break out, the gravity's going to pull you back. You know, try people can't leave a church. They get into a cult, they get into a gang, they get into a political party. They think the way the political party thinks. Because our thinking self identifies with the culture. Whether it's the big culture or the little cultures, or whatever it is. Our thinking self, our ego is an egg, in the sense that it is a little egg in a bigger egg. And Krishnamurti calls it, you know, the known. You know, so the culture creates a culture of the known, and then we believe in that culture and its assumptions and its values. So if we have a culture of political right, you see, that is a culture that we believe in because it has values that we resonate with. But it's all we're just like a cell phone with the internet, you see. So the cell phone is a mini internet. The whole internet is here. And this interacts with the internet. So when we're in a culture, whatever we call it, you see, we are, like the cell phone, correlating or reacting with the whole, reflecting it. You know, so each of us mirrors the culture we identify with. So then that's why we get into our political identities now. But all of it's still within culture. So what I'm interested in, what is it like to be outside of the whole thing? How do we get outside of the whole culture, not just the bad culture or the other culture, you see? See, everything within culture is going to be translation. It's going to be horizontal. We think we're getting out, but we're just going horizontal. Getting back to Jesus, you know, the horizontal of the cross is in time. So we're in a little culture here, and we figure a little religion here or whatever, and we find that that's too limiting. So we go this way to a bigger culture, a bigger church, a bigger understanding, a bigger identity. But we're still horizontal. It's still in culture. It's the vertical that drops out. The whole in culture, like Alice in Wonderland, the whole that you drop out of is vertical. You're going along one day and you have a mystical experience and you drop out. So that those who have mystical experiences have dropped out of culture, and they can't explain it when they come back because culture just deals with what's known. So if you drop into the unknown, and by unknown I don't mean it doesn't exist, I mean that you can't, it's not a intellectual or verbal experience that you can talk about and explain. It's beyond words. It's beyond thought. It's being itself, you see. So when you drop into being itself, you go beyond culture, which is a language system. Culture is a semantic language world, you know. So dropping out, you see, is dropping out beyond language. So when you come back into culture, which we do, you have to find a way to translate your experience into the language that other people that can understand. But they can't understand you because they have no reference to where you've been. Their reference is all within culture. Your reference is outside of culture. So it's kind of like, remember the movie 2001, Space Odyssey? So they had an obelisk would drop in to the apes, you know, and they couldn't figure out what it was because they had no reference to their world. And then the obelisk dropped into the astronauts thousands of years later. Same reaction. They couldn't. What is it? No reference to it. What is it? See, so the only thing we understand in culture is when something is referenced in culture. But if somebody drops out, like a Jesus or a Buddha, and then they try to communicate, well, they have to communicate through art and metaphor. But culture can't understand that because culture has no reference to that. So culture enculturates it and brings it into the culture and makes a church out of it, makes a religion out of it, or a philosophy, or a political party. So anyway, as I ramble along here, I hope you can stay, and follow me, because basically this is a ongoing talk I'm doing. These are not set talks. I don't come up and write this out, you see. I'm exploring this with you real time in my own life, right here in Blackstone, in the center of the world. But then you too are the center of the world. So thanks for dropping in, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, and we'll pick up this thread. Maybe this is Ariadne's thread. Maybe we're trying to follow it and get out of the labyrinth of culture. Maybe that's what we're doing. We're following Ariadne's thread through the darkness of culture. When you're inside of an egg, it's dark in there. All you have is an electric light. But the sun's outside. There's a crack in that egg. Whoa! Blinded by the light. Mystical experiences are full of being blinded by the light. What is that light? It's outside of the cultural egg. Put a crack in it. Whoa! The light's out there. But once you see that light, you smell it. You smell the light. You follow it. So anyway, I'll see you tomorrow morning.